Hello and welcome to Tellez. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is Interviews from Quito, the program where we explore the big challenges facing this country and the region. In today's program, we'll look at the recent cases of corruption which have been uncovered in Ecuador, different networks of illegal use of funds and overpricing of medical equipment and facilities, which have affected our economy and our capacity to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. So has the government done everything it can to fight corruption, or has it only been a smokescreen to stay afloat just months before an election and with its reputation falling? For that, we have Ivonne, a specialist on international law. Thank you for joining us, Ivonne.
Thank you, Carla.
So my first question will be, what is your analysis of these latest cases of corruption in Ecuador?
Well, the latest cases show the deep crisis that the country is facing towards not just the pandemic, but I guess the lack of leadership, the weak institutional framework that we have here in Ecuador as well, and also probably the weakness in the judicial institutions as well. I mean, when corruption cases flourish, that means that it's not just a tendency or an ethical tendency, but also a lack of an institutional enforcement of law as well, that allows corruption to flourish, because there is definitely impunity. So in this sense, I guess it is just revealing the very deep crisis regarding the political, the economic, and also the ethical and cultural factors that we face nowadays.
And most of these cases were already reported a while ago, or some of the lawmakers in Ecuador had already denounced that they were at least assumptions of corruption. What does that say about our legal system, our justice system as well?
There is a strong legal framework regarding corruption, and in that sense, I mean, for example, the criminal law. It is very clear regarding this. However, what is a problem in this sense? When there are no judicial institutions ready to enforce the law, the legal system just breaks. What we need here is the absence of the bribery, absence of this tendency towards favoring just personal interest. So that means that the judicial system here in Ecuador tends to be very weak regarding this. And let's not forget that we face also a lot of different cases dealing with power and dealing with corruption that are nowadays just not present in the country. And I'm talking about 100 of cases, different cases. So that means that there is a high level of impunity, because whenever someone, and I'm not talking about particular cases, just generalizing, but whenever someone who is facing some legal instructions, some legal processes here, or trials, whenever this or the person goes out from the frontiers of the country, then it means that we just lose any track of that person, and the country is incapable of doing something. And that just shows that you can face a lot of difficulties, of legal difficulties, whenever you're in the country, but whenever you go outside, you're just like free to do so. So that is a very delicate situation, because it means that law cannot be enforced in the country.
And what does that say also about our process to buy different goods and services around the country? Because most of the cases where, for example, people were buying and selling medical equipment to fight COVID-19 to hospitals in Ecuador, but they were being overpriced, or people that were not allowed to do these transactions were actually making millions of dollars in Ecuador. How can that be stopped or prevented if our system actually allows it to happen?
It is very sad that during a crisis such as this, we have to face people just pursuing its own personal economic interests and getting some advantage from the situation. I mean, I think it reveals also a very critical ethical problem over here, of a critical, a crisis of moral or morality in the very broad sense. Because whenever you try to take advantage of a situation like this, when so many people are dying and are relying on this kind of elements, for example, of things like masks and these medical equipment and everything, that means that we are really facing, I think probably this is one of the consequences of our system as well, and all the economic system that relies and has placed our system of values whenever we come always in first. I mean, my very own personal interest, and with that, my very personal economic interest as well. So I think that the executive's very weak political capacity to manage the crisis between the different levels of government, the precariousness of the public health system, and the funeral system as well, the roots of corruption and all this economic situation just means that, and also a very worrying situation is how the government or the administration seems to have no other way but just deterrence, threatening with the use of force to stop the force of the pandemic. And so what we can see is that the citizens are the ones that are facing all these problems, are the consequences of this corruption and the consequences of the weakness of the administration, but there are not enough measures being taken in order to face this impunity or this corruption problems. I think the only one that, and I'm talking about the position of the prosecutor here, probably is the one that is giving the citizens a little bit of hope regarding, okay, maybe at least these are being denounced. But as far as I can see, I have not seen a deep or a serious pronouncement by the government regarding, for example, these corruption cases, the last ones that we have faced. We're just seeing the judicial system not working, but at least making the correspondent the denouncers in order to start these trials. But there is an absence of the executive, and we saw the executive around 2 months ago, probably a month ago, when it was supporting the security system ES or IESS in Ecuador regarding the excellent work that it was doing. So definitely we see there is not a coherent line over here regarding what is happening, the facts, and we see that we, the citizens, are the ones facing the worst consequences over here.
And how do you see the work, for example, of the Attorney General's office? Because we saw a lot, at least in the media, we saw a lot of cases of arrests. We, just a couple of days ago, we saw a former president of Ecuador being arrested for alleged corruption, and his son and a lot of people from his own family that were arrested, and that somehow people that were connected to politics in Ecuador were saying that there might have been an agreement between the political establishment, the government, and these very powerful families that have control over politics and economics, or also like them. I'm talking specifically about Abdallah Bucaram, a former president in Ecuador. But a lot of people have said that maybe this was just a case of a political show, a TV show, because everyone saw it online, in social media and in TV, that this person was arrested and taken from his house. But then the process never went through. He got off quite easily. I'm not an expert in laws and justice, but at least there wasn't any case that was built around it.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't think we are in a position to determine whether this situation regarding the former president and this arrests going on can be some sort of an agreement. I'm not in the position to judge yet at this point. I see as far as I can see, the Attorney General's office has been quite efficient, but I think it lacks of the institutional support that a strong state demands. So the Attorney General's office is the one that, okay, prosecutes the cases and brings them to trial. But then if there is not a very good judicial system willing to process all these trials, and they go to nothing. I mean, we just not need the Attorney General's work, but we need the other system to work. In this case,
the Attorney General herself, she said, well, I'm bringing this case into justice. I left you the person that you were supposed to charge, but it was on the justice part to have that stake. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, just the Attorney General is not capable of working this out. Regarding the former president, for example, he was taken out from his house, and then bearing in mind that he has some medical issues, some medical problems, now he's facing a home detention. The case is not over yet, but he has to be charged very quickly because the Attorney General just makes the first instruction, but then he has to be processed and he has to be charged of some crimes. And that if there is a delay in this part, then probably he just has to be set free. There's enough evidence. We're just not talking about there was an arm that was found at his home, but there's enough evidence that there's a link. I think, as far as I have seen, there are a very good number of masks and medical instruments and equipment, and that has to do, of course, with what happened in some other hospitals in Guayaquil. So I think there is a very strong line of evidence over here that cannot be mistaken. I think that if in this particular case, and regarding his son and the people close to their families, if the people in Ecuador, we don't see a serious process over here, because we have to take into account that the principle of innocence has to come before everything. But if we don't see a fair trial over here, and this case treated by justice with a very serious approach, then I think this is going to be like probably the maximum point of impunity that we can face in this country. So I think this has to be taken very seriously. And regarding the fact that there is family of this former president outside of the country, that means that we are going to see the same thing over and over and again. People just fleeing out of the country, just avoiding justice, and then nothing happens. So I think this is a very serious thing. The Attorney General's office cannot work by itself alone.
And so these cases haven't been effective, or at least these actions to arrest or to investigate some people that were connected to corruption has not been effective in Ecuador. Do you think these may be a way to make people look away from other things that are happening in the country? For example, a humanitarian law that has been rejected by workers' unions. There's still, the popularity of the government continues to go down, and we're facing elections. Could that be the reason why?
Yes, I think that I don't think these things come in an independent form. I think government has been very good at just trying to elude and to avoid the basic reasons of the crisis over here. We have to take into account very deep, for example, statistics over here regarding how we can explain the situation that we are facing today. I mean, when the government, the present government took office, we have seen that there was a very strong change from the line that, of course, we had before regarding to the economic management of the country. And when we have, there is a very strong lack of leadership over here. We have the president delegating everything related to the pandemic to the vice president and to their ministers, that we can see is that they are running for offices and not just dealing with the basic causes of the crisis over here. Then we can see, for example, the difficulties related to the situation of vulnerability of most of the families in Ecuador, most of the families in Guayaquil, for example, unemployment, inadequate housing, high index of violence as well. So with a poverty rate very, very high, for example, 14% in Guayaquil, and a high poverty rate regarding the whole country as well. For example, some measures of alleviating, like the $60 bonus for some of the people, and we know that that hasn't reached most of the people that needed it. So I think those kind of issues over here reveal just how a structural change in Ecuador and the return to the neoliberal model over here, and with it an adjustment in the social sector, and among them the sector of health as well. So, for example, in the country, investment in health decreased from 36 million in 2017 to 110 million in 2019. So this is a downward trend. This implies a 34% decrease in health investment between 2017 and 2019. So I think all of this over here just reveal the less expenditure in infrastructure and health inputs, a dismissal of the real social causes over here, this humanitarian law that tends to makes it more easy for employers, but definitely that represents a decrease, and yes, a decrease, and like a threat to the workers' rights that have a constitutional protection and warranty. I mean, I am talking about a very wide set of factors over here, but what I'm trying to say here, and to conclude my idea, is that the government and the country as well here is facing a very deep crisis regarding the economic sector, the social sector, the educational sector as well, and even the external or the international area as well. And with those measures over here regarding on those mediatic things that we have seen right now, I think what the government is hiding here is very bad decisions underneath everything that will not only, or that does not only leave us like we are with the highest number of deaths per capita in the region, but also with a deep social crisis that will not will not be restored in a year or probably in a short period of time. So there are very bad decisions, the return to the IMF and the excess of debt that we have, all those structural changes, all those structural measures in order to comply with this international demands, in order to provide funding for the country, also mean a very restrictive way of governing the social needs over here. So I think what we are facing over here is the face of the mismanagement, not only of the crisis, but the mismanagement of the state.
Indeed. So how do you see that government that has been affected by all these criticism over its handling of the pandemic, over its handling of the social issues, the economic issues, the austerity measures that you mentioned? How do you see that government going into the next elections, which are pretty soon?
Well, first of all, we have to see what is going to happen to this election process over here, because probably they will be moved. And I don't know if this movement of the date could represent the very basic needs of moving them because of the health crisis, of the COVID crisis, or does this means just like a delay in all the political issues. So that is another thing that we can be very worried about. And I think we should, as citizens, should be very cautious. Well, the other thing, regarding the possible scenario of elections, I think the government has made it very clear by placing the figure of the vice president as the leader of this crisis, of this health crisis. I think there are very strong signs that we can probably see him run for the first office.
But he's the figure of the vice president. At least it gives me a bit of a confusion because, for example, he wasn't elected by Ecuadorians. We had a vice president before. He was put by, well, came after another vice president that wasn't elected. So it follows a long list of vice presidents that were not elected by the Ecuadorians. Could that have any effect on how people think about their next president, if he could be elected?
Yes, I think it doesn't have a lot of support because we don't see these figures over here as independent. We tend to see them as, for example, part of a bloc, in this case, part of this current government that we have right now. This government hasn't been successful in anything it has been done, as far as I can see. For example, today more than ever, it is demonstrated that this mission tenderness, or in Spanish, misión ternura, my best years, my whole life, all of these social programs that have been launched, definitely they were never part of a rigorous planning scheme or genuine structural social care policies. Mm-hmm. They were just mere programs, but they don't attempt this. So I don't see, I cannot say that the figure of the vice president could be successful because yes, he just appeared after a lot of political, I don't know if it failures, but problems that we faced before. And he's just making probably his own campaign during this crisis that he is facing. So I don't know if Ecuadorians could actually separate when the elections come the fact of the whole pandemic that has affected us in such a way, and a difference between a person that can actually run for president after all of this, just like a sum of failures, because there has not been quite a decision that we can see or regard as a satisfactory measure for us. Even the humanitarian law that is supposed to protect us from the worst effects of this pandemic, what it does is just lessens how we, our labor rights that were won, not just in the Constitution, but with a historical fight before. So we see, okay, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to restore the economy, trying to provide everyone with the support in order to take this and go out and get out from this? Or are we just trying to favor some sectors and go back to the impoverishment and the abuse that workers have? So I don't think there has been any measure that we can finally say and we have a whole satisfaction with this. So I don't know in this sense if we can, are we going to be able to separate those figures afterwards when we face the elections?
And we're also going to face a country where protests are going to continue, because we've seen throughout the quarantine due to the COVID-19 that even though people were not allowed to be out or be close to each other, we still saw a lot of protests, a lot of people just very angry at the government and going out to protest. Would that continue? Would that be still effective in a country like ours?
I think yes. I think we faced a very deep crisis less than a year ago, regarding these social inequities that we face over here and these economic inequities that we face. And what COVID has done is just worsen the situation, shows I think the failure of the neoliberal model over here. We can see that very specifically in Guayaquil, for example, how the inequity and poverty are very deep and are very, very well demarcated over here. So I think, yes, it's very probable that we can face social protest again, yes.
Indeed. I'm sorry, Yvonne, we are running out of time, but thank you very much for being with us and for explaining to us all these different aspects that are affecting our economy and our society as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla, very much.
So we've been talking to Ivonne Tellez, a specialist on international law, on the dozens and dozens of corruption cases which have hit our society in the last weeks and months, and the repercussions it has as we look ahead at the next elections. We also analyzed the criticism over the lack of action, or better, an efficient action, to find the culprits and to see that justice is made for the benefit of all. Thank you for watching. This is Interviews from Quito. I'm Carla Gonzalez.